Faith in the Real World, Season 2, Episode 2. I'm Matthew Teedy.
I'm Pastor Mark Teedy of St. John's.
Yeah, we are at St. John's Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota on, is it 48th Nicollet or 49th?
49th and Nicollet.
49th and Nicollet, all right. And today's episode is what we call the Great Reset, or it comes from the COVID-19 pandemic, how it affected churches and other institutions, but churches mostly. And the pandemic for us really hurt us.
Yeah.
But some churches died altogether, but we managed to survive, but just barely, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was tight. We had some really creative moves, and we had some people of the Child Care Center really bailed us out. St. John's here, we've got a couple of different assets. One of the things that we have first of all the congregation itself, but we also have a Child Care Center that we run as a secular organization, and then we also have this retreat center out in Annandale. And there were several stories about people being creative, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I think that the way we could start this is that Phyllis Tickle was a theologian who wrote that about every 500 years, the Holy Spirit seems to just do what she called the holy garage sale. And everything about every 500 years just got thrown out onto the lawn. The things the church decided to keep, it kept, and the things it didn't, it threw away. And she wrote back in the, I don't remember when she wrote that book. It's been a while, but she wrote back in the day. She said that she thought a great reform was certainly due. And so, because if you look back in the church history, right around the year 500 years after Jesus rose from the dead and ascended, we had the Council of Nicaea, and that really did a nice work at defining who Jesus is, what's his makeup, right? So they really did a good job for forever on that, coming up with a Nicene Creed, etc. And then 500 years later, right at the year 1000, there was a huge schism between the East Orthodox Church and the West, the Roman Catholic Church. And then at the year 1500, we have the Lutheran Protestant Reformation, and suddenly the church just fractures into hundreds of different denominations around the world. And then 500 years from that is the year 2000, right? And everybody kept saying, man, we need to reform, we got to change these things, et cetera, et cetera. The church kind of got fat and happy, kind of arrogant, and the church didn't want to change, really. Everybody settled into their denominations. They got really pro-denomination, even over pro-Jesus in certain instances. But if we were headed for a time of reform, COVID gave it to us, whether we wanted it or not.
Yeah,
this was it. I mean, it was, I wrote down the dates. So in 2020, our shutdown started. The last worship service we had was we shut down. The first shutdown Sunday was March 18, and then we didn't reopen until June 13th of 2021. So we were closed for 15 months or so. The average attendance prior to shutting down, in the year 2019, the average attendance for the Sundays, we were at 65.5. So 66 people per Sunday, butts in pews. And over those 15 months, we of course had 0 baptisms. We had 12 deaths, and 4 of those were directly related to COVID itself. So 1/3 of our deaths were from COVID, and the other 8 people that died were every single week, but in the pew, support of very involved council members, committee members, and so
that was just by natural causes, other disease.
Yeah. One guy died of old age. Several others died of other complications or what. But 12 deaths, which is 20% of our physically present group of people. And that caused a whole mess of emotional reactions because we couldn't bury them. We couldn't have the funerals. We couldn't say goodbye to a lot of those people. And then when we did reemerge from COVID, the church was not the same. We had, and the real sad part is that I remember distinctly talking to a member of this congregation who was here every single week. And he said to me, I just have a hard time being here. I can't come anymore because Bob's not here. Bob and Marlene, they're not here. It doesn't feel like church to me. And I said to him, the only reason Bob was Bob to you is because he was here all the time. The question for you is, who will you be Bob to? Because if we need you here as much as you humanly possibly can be here, not for God. We need you here for the other people around you, right? I mean, this is the hugest, most important thing. And what is now central to me is, who can I show up for? Not who can I share the love of God to. That'll come. That's a different thing. But most important, post-COVID, is, who can I show up for? Why do I need to be there? And I think that's the single greatest thing that is killing, the legions, the VFWs, those institutions that have been around forever and a day, is that we just don't show up for them. We just don't. And I think it's true that people are unbelievably busy. We do have now, Sunday is a main sporting event now for all ages, all the way down to T-ball and soccer club things and everything. It's Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings and all that kind of stuff. And on one hand, I lament that, because it means our people have to choose. Do they come to worship, or do they participate in their sport? And if they don't go to their sport, they can't play. Well, but what happens if they don't go to church? Obviously, we're going to let them back. Obviously, we're going to welcome them back whenever they come. But it's become competitive in such a way that it's teaching our people that presence in church is just like being a part of a club where I put my dues in a plate and now I get rights and privileges. So, like, as if to say, well, I'll send you $50 a year, and that way when I die, you'll still bury me, right? Because I'm still a member of that church, even though I never show up. I don't know anybody there. I don't know the pastor at all. I'm a part of the. That would be like if I came to your house for Thanksgiving. One time a year, I came to your house for Thanksgiving, but I ate my meal in the car. Where's the relationship in that?
There's none.
None.
Yeah.
And that's what the congregations are starving for. But it's also what people are dying for because it's loneliness and isolation and all those kinds of things. And it's not necessary to have those relationships with other human beings that are believers of Jesus to go to heaven. Not at all. That's a different ball of wax completely. But it's necessary for a sense of community, for being. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to be St. John's Lutheran Church? Not the building, but the people. That's the question that's really, really tough. And since COVID, my goodness, or since this Holy Spirit's Holy Garage Sale, it's really hard to navigate those waters. How do I feel a sense of participation and ownership as a person of St. John's, as a part of this family, however dysfunctional we might be, right?
Yeah.
You and I are family. We carry the same name. You're my nephew, you're my godson. We get together and we play board games and we laugh and we cry and we do our thing. And we are a people because we do that. We tend that relationship. How are people tending the relationship as St. John's is a huge question. And it's got to be balanced for people, members of this congregation. They've got to figure out, how do we be St. John's fully in, let the other members of St. John's that we're in, even though I want to still stay active in my sports, my clubs, my groups, my other circle of friends, job commitments, etc. I mean, all of that's got to be figured out. And I think that's a thing that St. John's has got to figure out. I think that's what the whole world's got to figure out. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. One of my things that long ago I read a book called The Centered Life by Jack Fortin, and his basic theory in that whole book is that we are not called to balance life. We're called to be centered. And I like that because he uses the analogy of spinning a top, right? When you spin a top, you can lay that thing completely over, and it will just be completely laid on its side, but it stays on that point as long as it's spinning. And that's being centered. Yeah, we're leaning over. He says it's the same thing. We can't balance life, and suddenly your child runs out in the middle of the street. No, I want an unbalanced life right there. I need to get that kid out of that street right now, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody has a car accident or something horrible happens, we will be out of balance. But if we are centered and if our center is our faith or it is Christ Jesus in our life, then it doesn't matter. We don't have to balance life. Whatever comes my way, whatever tips me over, I can still remain centered. I love that. And so I'm starting to think that now, post-COVID, people are going to be busy. That's our culture. That's our norm. How do I do my ministry well enough that people can feel centered in the midst of being overwhelmed with other calendar obligations? Then we can work on spiritual health, not spiritual toxicity. We can worry about, or we can address issues of overcomplicated calendars without it being dangerous or unhealthy or whatever. We can talk about mental wellness, being centered in Christ Jesus. Even if we're in a crazy moment where everything seems wrong or sad or whatever, we can still stay centered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really important. I really, really do. What do you think? What's one way that you can see, Matthew, that the church today is different than it was before COVID? And not just St. John's, but like the church and the function of the church is different.
Well, it's interesting for me because I grew up in rural areas.
Yeah.
And I've always noticed how the population is much bigger and younger the further you go out of an urban area.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I grew up around the St. Cloud area, and we went to a church in Sartell. That was always very full and lots of teenagers and kids there. And then eventually we looked at other churches around here, and they're much older in population. Not as much kids, there's some, but not a lot. And it just seems more elderly and almost, I don't want to say out of date. I feel like they've gotten better at that, especially after pandemic. But I guess I'm seeing post-COVID, it's just people, their priorities resetted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to family specifically, and like their jobs.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that gives them the most relaxation and pleasure, like Sunday morning football. They probably prioritize that over church a lot.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like people just don't see Sunday as the day we go to worship anymore.
I think that's right. And that's another question is,
it's always been marketed too as the day of relaxation as well.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. The Sunday peaceful morning at home,
Mm-hmm.
Sitting in a bathrobe, drinking a cup of coffee, having that beautiful slow morning. It, as a pastor who has always worked on Sunday mornings, during COVID, I completely understood why those Sunday mornings are so beautifully attractive.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
I totally get it. And so I know that there's a church in St. Paul. I can't remember the name of the movement. It's like a house church kind of thing, where they worship on Sunday evening, and then they have small groups on Wednesday evening. That's it. No choirs, no Bible studies, no nothing. They just have a worship service on Sunday evening with food, and then they have something on Wednesday nights. And if you're going to be a part of that congregation, you must participate in both, which is just a really interesting thing. I can't use the word must in anything, or they'll just not come. I just can't. Everything we do is invitation, and we want people to come. We do want you to come. I mean, we do.
Yeah.
But it's always invitation. And I think people hear that well now. That's part of for me, the post-COVID change was pre-COVID, I really got an earful, right? Because I drove for Uber and Lyft for almost 3 years. And I would never tell people, and you know this, but I would never tell people that I was a Lutheran pastor, because it just killed conversation immediately. And they go, "Oh, do you do this all the time? Or do you have a full-time job and this is your side gig?" And I say, "Oh, yeah, I don't. I have a full-time job." And they're like, "Oh, okay. Well, so how do you like doing this as a hobby?" Well, I do this because my wife said, if you want to go do something, have fun, you go find the money for it somehow. So I started driving for Uber and Lyft. And then they would just talk to me about life in the universe and everything. And I would hear just amazingly how sad and lonely people were. How do you meet anybody? And I'd say to them, they'd throw out their apps that they use, and Tinder and Bumble is one, I think.
Bumble's one, Hinge.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them, right? And
Yeah.
so And back then there was just a couple, but they were emerging. And then I'd say, well, you ever thought about going to a church or a synagogue or something? And then every single time was, nobody goes to church anymore. And there's no young people at church anymore, to your point. What's interesting now is that COVID also created a bit of a baby boom. And so pre-COVID, we didn't have a Sunday school class. We had none. We didn't have any kids to teach. At least they didn't come on a regular basis enough to teach them. And so we didn't do Sunday school. And then post-COVID, in the last calendar year, I've done 2.5 times more baptisms than funerals, which
Nice.
is really nice.
Yeah.
And with the 12 people that died, many of them were our older members. And so our average age dropped from 68.5 of all of our active members of the congregation, went from 68.5 down to 48.5 because we gained new members through baptism. And that has been really fun. We actually ended up needing to hire a cross-generational minister, and that's Edith. And she's been doing Word of the Week, a.k.a. children's sermon on Sunday mornings. And last Sunday, she had 6 kids in that front pew. And that's just been really, really fun. And now how does St. John's do our whole life together with knowing that we've got to make sure that every generation, every age group is being valued, that they know that they are valued, and that we are showing up for even, 5-year-old Blake or 2-year-old Maddie or Arthur or Henry or Annika, all these little kids. I want them to know that I'm their pastor too, not their future pastor, right? They're not the future church, they're church now. And so that's been really, really fun to reinvent ourselves. And it's also been a refreshing move that when I hear people lament or just be angry at who the church had become, totally closed off the LGBTQ community, kind of able to demand people's time, that's all out, right? 2009, the ELCA opens its pulpits to LGBTQ plus community. So now we've got gay, lesbian, gay, tri, bi pastors and bishops. We do gay weddings, funerals, baptisms. Who cares? I mean, it's just sort of it's not a barrier in the ELCA anymore. It just isn't. And in fact,
And we have members and staff members.
we do. The president of our congregation last year is a gay man. So we've had staff members that were bi, gay. It just comes down to this. That I think what we've learned at St. John's is all means all.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Christ says, "Go into the world, baptize everybody, teach them and I'll be with you to the end of the age." He didn't say go to certain people. Just go, willy-nilly. Go wherever you're supposed to go. And I think that's, on the one hand, made my work harder, because no distinction means I must be intentional about making no distinctions. And at the same time, it's a whole lot more refreshing, because I don't have to worry about who hears it and who might show up. I just hope everybody shows up, and that we can be a movement again. When the Christianity first started out, they called themselves followers of the way. They weren't even in church, which seems static. It was more of a dynamic. They thought of themselves as a movement of people who are gathered because of the love of Christ. Maybe that's our future. Maybe we need to be a church like the Book of Acts and emerge into the world as a completely reborn, completely rebirthed movement of people, rather than a static church or denomination and doctrinally focused and whatever. I would much rather figure out a way that our doctrines that we have can be pulled inside out, that we don't live to the doctrines. The doctrines help us live into the world. I got to figure that out. I think that's how the world needs us to be. And I think that's how we can be most effectively, especially post-COVID, when people are nervous about being in public spaces, where they're nervous about shaking people's hands, they're nervous about being around other people. Well, except unless it's a sporting event. then they'll go,
But that fear of shaking hands still exists.
it sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, we used to shake hands all the time. And we had a couple of couples that they went around the room and they would hug every single person in the room. I mean, we were a small congregation, and she would hug as many people as would allow her to hug them. That's gone. Now it's a lot of people staying put and just going, peace. Just put the fingers up and the peace signal.
Wasn't there a time where you like generally try to force people to shake hands again? You're like, guys, we'll be okay. Like, we can shake hands again.
We didn't ever force it. What we did say is, if you're okay with shaking someone's hand, then feel free to put your hand out. And if they respond by just giving you a peace symbol, honor that. So we intentionally instructed them. We're at the spot now that the CDC says we can shake hands. And if you're willing to shake hands, fine, shake hands. What was really weird about that time frame is that there were people who wouldn't shake hands for the sharing of the peace, but they would shake my hand at the door leaving the sanctuary every single Sunday. And it's what our heads would allow us to do.
No.
They didn't think it of anything like shaking somebody's hand in a line somehow was different to them than shaking someone's hand in the pew.
Yeah.
It was just
weird.
It is weird, and people are weird. I'm weird. There's things you think about, things that you don't. But I think after post-COVID, as we continue to emerge, I call it sort of a post-COVID syndrome, with this kind of weirdness about shaking hands or social distancing still. There's still that weird awkwardness there. Or even just engaging with things. Going to movie theaters. Theaters are suffering terribly with attendance.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's your bailiwick.
Theaters, too, they've been struggling. They're getting better, but they've struggled quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I was talking with I wasn't talking with him. He was giving a speech. Michael Brindisi of the Chanhassen Dinner Theater, and Senator Klobuchar was visiting that night.
Wow.
And he was talking about how Klobuchar apparently supported legislation that provided emergency funding to theaters in the area. And he said he really gave her credit, saying, I don't think the Chanhassen Dinner Theater would have survived without that funding.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and the dinner theater, which is over like 50 years old, and it became a major staple with not just Minneapolis, but in the theater community in the country, especially around Broadway people.
Right.
Yeah, that would be devastating to see that go.
Yep.
So hearing that, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And we hear the rumors of how, are they closing now? Are they closing now? That's been around forever, but this was real.
Yeah.
He was saying like this, we could have ended easily.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I think, we sort of teased this at the very, very beginning about how the child care center families really stepped up to us. And it started with like one or two of the child care families who said that, we know that the child care technically are staff of church. We know that that's true. Is there any chance, since our kids aren't, the early stages, we were doing child care for first responders only, right? So the firemen, police department, doctors, EMTs, that's all we were allowed to do. And so most of our child care families were not giving or getting any services. And so this woman walked in the office and she said, we're not getting any services from the child care center, but could we earmark that somehow so that we want you to be able to continue to pay our child care staff and maybe hold our place so that when we eventually do come back, you've got a staff and we've got a place. And I said, that's a great idea. And I think since you're not getting any services rendered for you, you could write all that off as a charitable gift in your taxes, I think. So we explored that a little bit, and sure enough, we found out that we could do that. They would come in, and we would make sure that would go to a specific account just to pay the child care staff. And because of that, we were able to keep open and employed all of our child care staff.
That's nice.
Unbelievable. It was really, really beautiful moment. And many, many of the child care families, I think there was 120 families, and I'll bet you it was 80 of them decided to do that. Some of them just got services, and so they couldn't do that. But many of them did. And then that helped us on the backside to get that employee retention credit back from the government of what we had to pay in for Social Security or whatever that is. But because we kept everybody employed, it helped the economy stay going, and it just kept going. But it all started with that one woman that came in and said, "Could we do this?" Just amazing.
That's
and
awesome.
it really awesome and so creative. And that's what I'm trying to catch. That level of creativity to reinvent how we do what we do as a congregation in service of God and neighbor. Wholly different. I mean, entirely different. We can no longer do what we did in 2019, 2018, all the way back to 1959. We can't. We cannot do it.
Nope.
And if we didn't want to change, well, the world did. So we better. We've got to change. Some things we never will. We will always be a Lutheran congregation, believing in the triune God, confessionally based. In other words, we proclaim our faith, which defines us. All that's going to stay the same. But boy, if we mothball it and we go back into some semblance of, well, this is who we are. You need to come to us, and then we'll see if you like what we do and who we are. That can't be the future. Well, what's the future going to look like? And so that's part of the reason we started with faith practice neighboring practices, FPNP, which is Minneapolis. That's a beautiful ministry of the Minneapolis Area Synod. And Nick Tangen runs that. And it's how do we listen well, and how do we respond in ways that are following the lead of the person we're meeting for the first time? How do we be good neighbors to people? And he tells these marvelous stories about asking the right question. Like, here's a great question. What's something you know how to do so well you could teach somebody else? It's a fabulous question.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about what they would maybe do, and then you start thinking about, well, is there a way that we could do that at our church? Is there, if we had, you like to tinker around, let's say, on trains, and I mean, that's a hypothetical. You like to tinker around on trains, and what if we were able to put together a model train group in our chapel that we don't use much for things, except childcare uses it a lot, but what if we did that and dedicated some space for model trains? And then we got some of the people in the neighborhood and let them know that we're starting a model train. Who knows? Where does that go?
I don't know.
And it's less about building a church, more about building relationships as a good neighbor. How do we turn the building itself into a community center?
Exactly.
And we're doing that now. We've got St. John's as a place for the Red Cross blood drives. The Tangletown Neighborhood Association is using our building for clothing swap. By the way, in August of this year, we'll have another clothing swap, so bring your stuff over, but not the leggings. No leggings.
This episode's probably going to air in the fall, so.
We had it then.
But next year, though, next August.
Yeah, I mean, watch for those, because we do them in the fall and we do them in the spring for the Tangletown Neighborhood Association.